During the India-Australia series, I received this tweet about Pujara's first innings at Sydney. I'd never heard of the series losing innings before, so I think that makes this a work of art more than just a tweet. But the gist really was shared by many fans, Australians and Indians. People really thought that Pujara had batted so slow he'd lost India the match. And not just people, but Ricky Ponting people. The Australians do have a thing about scoring fast, and we could come back to that, but it ain't just the impatient Aussies who have troubles with slow scoring rates in test matches. Yes, Virat has been going on about this for a long time. This was in Wellington almost a year back, and to paraphrase Virat, he basically says that if you're just waiting and going nowhere, a good ball is going to come for you. That is what most attacking batsmen think. That is not what defensive batsmen think. And contrary to popular opinion, slow batsmen do okay. The game that Virat is talking about is where India were bowled out for 190 in a second innings on the fourth day. Virat went out playing an attacking shot and was upset the other batsman didn't play any. And he wasn't forced into that shot because his teammates were batting too slow. Pujara was already out, Bahari wasn't in yet. Virat just made a mistake. And he made a mistake in the first innings trying to attack as well. He tried to use a method that works for him, and it didn't. Batting at test level is kind of like going on a first date. You're trying to accentuate the positive and hide the negative. That's what most test players do. The problem is that very few people seem to accept that there is more than one method. And look, I get it. I'm kind of with Virat at a certain point. I grew up in Australia and I believe the best form of defense is slogging over mid-wicket. But I also understand that there are other ways of doing this. But right now, it seems that most people believe that test batting can only be too fast, too slow, or just right. But let's focus on the man who was singled out for his lack of singles. Here's a collection of Pujara's strike rates for his first 50 runs from a bunch of non-Asian tests that I found. And if you're thinking, that's pretty slow, you should see some of his smaller innings, where he barely moves at all. The thing is that generally what happens is Pujara catches up. So this dark green line here is Pujara's strike rate when he toured Australia in 18-19. For the first 50 runs of each innings is on the left, and his overall strike rate is on the right. You can see, over time, once he got past 50, he really started to amp up a little bit. The problem with this series for Pujara really is that he went out not long after he made 50, so he had no time to amp up. So all we are left with is the tediously slow way he went about those first 50 runs. The thing that people haven't mentioned is that this was actually quite a slow scoring series even without Pujara. Last 5 years, India have been scoring at 3.4 runs and over. They were down at 2.7, even slower than when Pujara batted really slow the last time they won in Australia. And the last 2 times Australia have played against India, they've been slower as well. And that includes this series, where India almost never had a full-strength bowling attack. They were still slower than normal. So yes, Pujara was slow. But also, most everyone was slow. But let's sidestep the Pujara outrage for a little bit, just to have a talk about scoring rates in general. An attacking batsman has intent to score, and defensive batsmen have intent to stay in. Most batsmen are, obviously, kind of in the middle. But for most batsmen, they are roughly stuck with what works for them. Because most batsmen aren't Virat or Ricky. They're just a collection of skills and flaws that are trying to hold on to a career. Here is a list of the highest scoring batsmen of all time. Only 13% of them have a strike rate above 60. And other than a couple of flash Harrys at the top, most players just are in the middle, as you can see here. But when you draw a line at 3 runs and over, it's almost exactly halfway through. Almost as many batsmen score quick as score slow. Oh, and you can see this little blue guy here, can't you? This is Pujara. Now you're probably thinking, well, this is an all-time list and old players used to be very slow. But surely he is the slowest now, what with all the T20 stuff going around. This is the list of the slowest modern-day batsmen, and he's obviously on it. But he's still more in the Martin Guptill and Faf du Plessis area than he is the Silver and Brathwaite section. But when people are talking about batting slow, it's not always one batsman, sometimes it can be the whole team. So my theory is this only starts to make a difference about how we think around about the 50 over mark of the inning. We forgive the openers, but once a new ball is gone, we expect people to score quicker. The weird thing is that this shows that there is really such a small difference. Less than 6 runs difference between the very new ball and the extremely old ball. But let's just go back to that 50 over mark again. If you're scoring at 2 and over for these 50 overs, you'll be at 100. If it is 3 and over, you'll be at 150. I mean, case closed. Everyone should bat quicker. But of course, that's kind of nonsense. When we sit at home, we see teams struggling to hit the ball off the square. There's probably a reason for that. Perhaps they are trying to get through a tough period, maybe a batsman is out of form, or the pitch doesn't suit the guys in the middle, and there is also considerably more risk in upping the strike rate by a run. That's a big, big step up, because if there wasn't, everyone would do it. So I feel now that you, me, and your drunk uncle, when you tell him next time you see him, all know a little bit more about run rates in tests. But the most important thing to note is that scoring in Test cricket is just really hard at any time. Let me show you the easiest way I know how. Here is a list of the greatest bowlers who ever lived, ranked by their strike rates in Test cricket. You can see the poor finger spinners and a couple of wrist spinners up here working harder than anyone else just for a few crumbs. And then down here, you see the super quick guys who rip through people. You see this one in red that looks like the best fast bowler ever? Well, that's the dismissal rate of players using attacking shots according to CricViz. Only Rabada is anywhere near it, and he's young and will probably slow down and take his wickets at a far more pedestrian pace. But attacking shots is still way quicker than the best bowler we've ever had. Playing attacking shots leads to a lot of dismissals in tests. Defensive and rotation shots are massively more safe. But what this shows is that scoring runs is never that easy. You can block all day and wait for loose balls to attack and get dismissed, or you can try and rotate strike, which is always going to be tougher if they haven't moved the field yet. So let us get to the real truth of the matter. There is an inherent risk in even rotating the strike. Look at a couple of India wickets against Australia in that very same series. You have probably heard the phrase, steal a single. There's something to that. Hanuma Vihari needed a quick single against Australia. Well, that's what he thought anyway. All things considered, this is a low-risk single. Most fast bowlers wouldn't intercept this. Those that would probably not pick it up so cleanly, and certainly not release it as quickly as they did, and their chances of hitting the stumps are even lower. At best, I give this a 12% chance of a run out. Maybe 17%. I haven't really thought this through. But that means that there is still a risk of losing your wicket. Vihari used his feet, so there is a risk there. He hit the ball to the right hand of a fielder, there is a risk there. The fielder was close to the stumps, there is risk there. Even if he is very, very unlucky. But he was very, very unlucky. But he tried to steal a single and he got caught. Let's have a look at another player trying to find a single. Ajinkya Rahane was facing Pat Cummins in the same innings, and like many Indian batsmen of that series, was struggling to score. So he tried to manufacture a run to a ball that he thought was short with a little bit of whip. It was never a high percentage shot as the ball wasn't that wide, but unluckily for Rahane, the ball seamed back massively, and that room that he thought was there was never there in the first place, and it meant that he dragged the ball back onto the stumps. Here's one of those stumps now. These weren't batsmen playing reckless or even really attacking shots, and yet slight mistakes caused their downfall. That is what creates most wickets. Batsmen make tiny errors, sometimes in defensive technique, but often trying to score. And for most batsmen, they're usually caught between two modes anyway. But let's look at someone who is not. Let's look at the poster boy for dot ball. But let's not focus on the fact that the last time he batted in Australia, he went in with a similar tactic of starting really slow, and he ended up winning that series for India, did he? Interesting. Let's look a bit more at his method. Most batsmen in Test cricket essentially survive by finding a way to handle the toughest ball, the one just on or outside off stump on a good length. Kane Williamson does it by hitting here. Joe Root goes here, and Stephen Smith obviously goes over here. This is how they ensure that Test bowlers don't trap them and work them over. Mostly, they go by the simple method of if you're at the other end, that is very hard to do. And if you have a shot like one of these guys, you should definitely use it. Most players don't, which is why most players don't make any runs in Test cricket. This is where Pujara is interesting, as he doesn't turn the strike over nearly as much as the others. He has a lot of dot balls and very few singles. And when you look at the overall numbers, he's clearly right towards the end, but not quite the worst strike rotator. When you take out Asia, he goes straight to the back of the line, behind Azhar Ali, who has never met a ring fielder he didn't want to pat the ball back to too softly. Pujara doesn't score from over 80% of his balls outside of Asia, and he only finds singles 10% of the time. It's actually remarkable he's made any runs at all outside of Asia, and he's averaged over 37 in basically a decade of playing away by essentially standing still. That shows his extraordinary ability to soak up pressure when other batsmen would not be able to do it. Oh, he's showing intent. He's showing intent not to score. And if you look in the last 10 years, only Pujara, Smith and Sangakkara have faced more than 100 balls per innings. That's some company to be in. If you just look at outside of Asia, he drops all the way down to 5th. And again, there's some names ahead of him, some good names. And he's still facing more than 90 balls an innings. That is a nice round number. If I remember my times tables correctly, and I don't, I think that's 15 overs, which is a remarkable amount of balls to be able to face in any innings. And even if Pujara didn't score from a single one, which obviously isn't true, although at times is almost true, he's already helping India just by being at the crease that long. The other batsmen are getting an easier ride through tired bowlers and an older ball because he exists and he is so consistent at what he does. According to CricViz, Pujara attacked only 7.6% of his deliveries, the lowest by any batsman since 2006. But he also wasn't dismissed playing one. And he scored 26 fours in that time. They were almost pitch perfect. None of this makes Pujara the ideal player. Obviously, he wouldn't be batting this slow unless he had to, and he would love to make more runs. I mean, he'd probably just like to rotate the strike more. But the problem is that he's not particularly good on deciding a run, he's not particularly athletic at running between the wickets, and he is fundamentally opposed to opening and or closing the face on any defensive shot to try and manufacture a run. And Pujara took this plan to the extremes. The weird thing is that this time, India actually based their plan kind of around what Pujara was going to do. As Vihari has already told Cricinfo, their plan was to tire out the bowlers, make them do extra work. And remember, the Australian bowlers won the first test in a gallop, and their attack looked absolutely exhausted by the third, and they failed to close out India in the fourth. Pujara faced 928 balls in the series. Now, you might be thinking runs matter more, and guess what? Runs do matter more. In modern cricket, it actually makes sense for your batsmen about as long as they can because we all play back-to-back test series now. You want to tire them out, and you can. But, quite obviously, Pujara is a complete outlier here, and there is no doubt that he wanted to make more runs. 3 times he got past 50, and that is usually when he starts to score quicker and cash in, or at least pick up some loose change in his case. In all honesty, he would much rather be over here. There are very few situations in Test cricket where you shouldn't score more runs. But let us take Vihari's comments out and think about this in a more non-specific way. Do slow batsmen put more pressure on other players? It's a really hard thing to factor in, and in truth, you hear it a lot, but I'm not sure it means that much. Often it is said by cricket commentators who have already been paid for all 5 days and would love to have a round of golf on a day off. And I am sure that in some situations it does put pressure on other batsmen. Of course, so does going out. And if batting too slow was a problem, I think by now cricket would have worked this out, and slow players would have been completely driven from the game, and they haven't been. And if you go back to Pujara for a minute, we usually know if they're going to be slow beforehand. We know a lot about players. Like, no batsman is going to be surprised if they get out in the middle and suddenly Pujara is 20 from 100 balls in Australia. And playing with players with different mindsets and different strengths and different ability of running between the wicket, that's kind of the job of professional batsmen. But yes, Pujara's strike rate was cadaverous. And also, India did win the series. They have won a lot of tours with him. And a lot of those series have been him striking, which is probably the wrong word, but him going very slow. Now, it would be disingenuous to say that there are never any drawbacks to scoring slow in a test. I mean, there are obviously a few. Dot balls are great, and with that you have Shane Warne 3 maiden theory, which I know sounds like the start of a dirty joke. I'm not sure the 3 maiden rule really stacks up. Generally that's when players are playing defensively, that's why there are 3 maidens, and it's far easier to get batsmen out when they are playing attacking. But you can understand the idea of piling up dot balls should affect batsmen one way or another, other than Pujara, he doesn't count. And this leads to the strike rotation that we talked about before. If you don't rotate the strike, test bowlers will work you out. It should be pointed out that we talk about this a lot for defensive batsmen, but we don't mention it as much for the attacking batsmen who hit boundaries and don't rotate the strike. Also, strike rotation can be a healthy run rate of 2 runs per over. Scoreboard pressure does seem to have an effect on cricket. But remember, on the scoreboard 2 things are marked, runs and wickets. It's funny when we talk about scoreboard pressure, we really only mean one of them. I think fields and bowling rotations are the most affected by slow scoring rates. Captains can put their men wherever they want them and use their bowlers to their own plan if you don't put any pressure back on them. Attacking a team brings about the quickest changes. Like before he ran a dad Twitter account, Virender Sehwag was one of the greatest disruptors of a field, actually of all cricket. One time in county cricket, when the ball was reversing to him, he hit it into the River Taff because he wanted it replaced. attacking batsmen change things quicker. And that can lead to panic. There is a fairly normal rhythm to Test cricket, so scoring very fast certainly can change that. Scoring moderately fast generally doesn't. There are also contextual reasons to be quicker, like maybe approaching a new ball in some situations, or when you're going for a declaration, or various things like that. But the total runs always matters a lot more than the pace that they have been scored at. The only problem, if you had a lot of batsmen who scored very slow, was that your matches might end up in draw. It's pretty hard to win tests without taking 20 wickets, and you need to give yourself enough time to do that. But right now, that has never been easier. We haven't had this few draws since the Spanish flu, and I'm not suggesting global pandemics are only related to the ratios of draws in Test match cricket. I think there are two things that have coloured our thinking when it comes to scoring rates in Test cricket. One is obviously T20. It has warped the brains of many people, and that's fair enough. We all watch a lot of white ball cricket now, and if we say batsmen get confused by mixing between the formats, and I'm not sure that's true, but let's just go with that so I can finish this sentence, maybe fans also get a bit scrambled going between the formats. But you can't blame T20. This started with these guys, the self-proclaimed dominators. They did dominate, to be fair, world cricket for a generation, and did so by scoring quite fast. They often talked about scoring at 4 runs and over, but in truth it was more 3.5. But they were still a long way ahead of anyone else. But they also averaged more runs than any other team, had a number 7 who pretty much averaged 50, and the world's best bowling lineup. I mean, maybe it wasn't the scoring rate? I also think that Australia may not be the most interesting thing on this graph, as actually, it may be the fact that Sri Lanka had the 2nd best run rate, the 4th best win percentage, in a period where they had their 2 greatest bowlers ever. In this period, the team with the 3rd best win percentage was actually England, and they were the 7th quickest scorers. In this last decade, other than the fast-scoring outlier Bangladesh, it's really just the fastest scorers that are the 4 highest-ranked teams, but they're also the 4 biggest scoring teams. You would suggest having a look at these last 2 graphs that scoring more runs is still better than scoring them slightly quicker. Who knew? As a general rule, teams who win score faster, and the gap is pretty wide here, and this makes perfect sense. We also know that's going to be skewed by a lot of third innings where the team in front is probably playing for a declaration. You can see straight away that the difference has been halved, meaning that winning teams score at only 0.3 runs and over more than the losing teams. That's 27 runs a day. That's not a huge difference. Being that losing teams lose wickets more often and winning teams are generally better, I'd say that's a phenomenally close record, really. And look, as I said before, I'm a slogger. I like to hit the ball real hard, generally in the air. But that doesn't mean that there isn't worth in batting slow. Look at Pujara. He's made 6,000 runs at an average of 47.74. He clearly knows something about the game. And it's not just him. For all the slow guys out there, they have found a method to score runs, and the idea is to score 1 more than the opposition, not per over, but at the end of the game. And all this reminds me of cricket's greatest poet, Kanye West. Bat slow, homie. Bat slow, homie. You never know, homie. Might meet some ones, homie. You need to pump your brakes and bat slow, homie.